Morning, Mitch.
Morning, Aaron. How are you?
Good, mate. Just saying good morning, pretty much to say good morning, but also to check my microphone's working. So
Yeah, no, loud and clear.
I'm going to go offline. Cheers.
Yeah, also.
Morning, guys.
Morning. How are you, Aaron?
Yeah, good, thanks. I'm just going to go offline while we wait.
Sounds good.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
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 Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Just wait for a couple more minutes for, or maybe another minute. We've all been up early, obviously, to get to this meeting. So thanks very much, David and I. We finished hearing it after 6 yesterday in Hutt City. So it's been a busy old time for us, and likewise for most of you as well. So Megan, is there anyone that you can see perhaps we're waiting for?
No, I think all of our council expert witnesses are here. We were expecting Christine Chong to be in attendance, but she can come in later when she arrives.
Okay, I've also just seen a chat that there's a man stuck in traffic somewhere and is going to be delayed. So I think we just carry on. Yeah, so look, welcome. This is a recommencement of the private plan change by Welhom to the Marsden District Plan, and we have received all the information that we requested in our minute 4, so that's all come through to us for consideration. So I'd like to thank everyone for the work put into that. It's been very helpful. In terms of order of batting, I would suggest that we start with the council reporting officers reporting back to us, and then move on to the closing submissions for the plan change requester. That sound about right?
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I think in terms of the protocol for our Teams call, this is being recorded. Megan, I see.
Yes, and George is taking minutes as well.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thanks, Georgia. Could we please turn microphones off, everyone? And that'll just give us a clear run through. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Wellington. So I'm pretty private here, but there was a bit of noise coming through. So Megan, let's just hand over to you to take us through the officer's right of reply, and just on a highlights basis, we do have a few questions as you go along, so we'll either keep those to the end in terms of just your summary positions, and we'll go from there, eh?
Sounds good. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present. My name is Megan Natasha Barr. I'm a Principal Planner at Foresight Consulting Limited, part of SLR, a multidisciplinary environmental consultancy. I hold a Bachelor of Resource and Environmental Planning with honours from Massey University, and I am an intermediate member of the New Zealand Planning Institute. I have 13 years professional experience in consultancy, local government and central government roles. During my time as a policy planner at Kororua City Council, I processed Plan Change 5 to the Kororua City District Plan. This plan change related to the urban rezoning of the Aotea block and established the Aotea Suburban Shopping Centre and Aotea Mixed Use Policy Area. During my time as a Senior Policy Advisor in the National Direction Team at the Ministry for the Environment, I processed a streamlined planning process application for Change 1 to Chapter 6 of the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. Change 1 to the CRPS identifies future development areas for urban housing in Rolleston, Raniora and Kaiapoi, and gives effect to the requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development 2020. I also assisted with the processing of the streamlined planning process application for Plimmerton Farm in Porirua, now Plan Change 18 to the Porirua District Plan. Plan Change 18 rezoned the property known as Plimmerton Farm from rural zone to a new Plimmerton Farm zone, intended to provide for urban development, including housing, a retirement village and a commercial area. In my current role with Foresight, I frequently make submissions and present at hearings on plan changes on behalf of the Oil and Gas Industry Environmental Working Group, which includes BP, Mobil and Z. I confirm that I have read the Code of Conduct for Expert Witnesses in the Environment Court Practice Note 2023 and that I agree to comply with it. I confirm that I have considered all the material facts that I am aware of that might alter or detract from the opinions that I express, and that this evidence is within my area of expertise, except where I state that I am relying on the evidence of another person. Foresight Consulting Limited was engaged by Masterton District Council.
Megan, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Are you reading? What are you reading from there? Is that a summary statement, or are you reading out your? Yeah,
So
I'm just trying to gauge.
That's just notes about the type of thing I would have presented in person.
Oh, look, we've read all that information, so I don't think you need to continue verbatim with that. We're really focusing in on your addendum post hearing. That's what we wanted to. We've heard all the evidence and have come through to us with some further observations and advice. If that's okay.
Yeah. So just before I begin on the 42A addendum, I note that in preparing the 42A addendum, I followed the advice of the hearing panel in hearing minute 4 and gave the Masterton District Council's experts' position on evidence presented at the hearing, minor evidential matters and rebuttal evidence updated based on the hearing. So in terms of the Section 42A addendum, the first matter is the Masterton Urban Growth Strategy 2019, or MUGS. At the request of the hearing panel, I sought additional information from Masterton District Council about the MUGS, which was provided to me by Christine Chong, the Manager of Resource Consents and Planning at Masterton District Council. That information was that MUGS was commissioned by the former planning manager, Sue Southey, in 2018 as a document to inform the council about why a review of the operative district plan was needed.
Sorry to interrupt again, Megan.
Yeah.
Megan, we have read all of this information, and as per the hearing process where we asked for just sort of like a highlights position, we don't really need you to read through everything. I just would prefer it if you just, as you'll have seen, sort of good lawyers do, just give us a highlights working through, highlight key points rather than reading out. I don't think it's sufficient.
Okay. So in terms of MUGS, I just skipped to the conclusion that it remains my opinion that it's not a relevant consideration for the purposes of this plan change. In terms of the legal opinion that it is considered relevant, then I consider it should have less status and weight when compared to the policy direction of the draft Wairarapa Combined District Plan, which is a more recent document. In terms of the draft Wairarapa District Plan, the future urban zone does cover this piece of land and approximately the area of CO3 from MUGS. I note that should the plan change not proceed and the draft district plan go through and become the proposed district plan, there are a range of policies and rules attached to a future urban zone which are more restrictive than what is being sought through this plan change.
Megan, I just have a question on that.
Yeah.
The process, the normal fuzz processes are where land is sort of identified for, outside of the current district plan time horizon, maybe not needed in the next 10 years, but this does provide an opportunity through further plan changes normally, it's my experience, for specific areas to go forward into development. Is that the way the proposed or the draft district plan deals with things? Because it seems extraordinary to me that normal residential type activities, including, or not normal, retirement villages, which are almost always provided some sort of consent status in those sorts of urban zones, turn to be non-complying as you've assessed. So I'm just trying to get my head around how that might, or what the thinking is behind that, just from your experience. And I see David's got a question as well, but if you could just answer me on that.
Sure. So the advice on that I received from Christine Chong, and who unfortunately isn't here yet, was that this was viewed as a future urban zone that was relatively distant in terms of coming online for availability. So she was talking about at least 5 years, but more likely 10 years before it would be looked at for development.
Yes, that's one part of the question. The second part is, as a planner, do you find it unusual that an urban zone looking forward would provide for retirement villages, healthcare activities as a non-complying activity?
And I'd say it is relatively unusual. However, Georgia did some research when we were working on the planner's joint statement of evidence about the activity statuses for retirement villages around the country. And there was a range of activity statuses. Most of them fell within restricted discretionary or discretionary under most plans, and outliers were controlled and non-complying.
Yeah, I read that, and that's the reason for my question. So look, that's fine. David, just handing over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Can you hear me okay? Good. Two questions actually, Megan. The first actually goes back to the horribly named mugs. I was just quite amused to see that it really never saw the light of day in terms of the public arena. And I know you and Georgia, from what you've said, have done some research on that, and you're relying on information from Ms. Southey. But was there any reason why that you could glean as to why it wasn't in the public realm?
So I'm relying on Christine Chong's answers to that one. And it's what she's been able to glean. She obviously arrived at Masterton District Council after Sue Southey's time, so she wasn't able to find full answers, but it seems that by the time it did get to council for decision making, council felt that it was outdated and didn't necessarily agree with the conclusions, so we're looking to have it reviewed and updated now.
Okay, so your position remains that that because it hasn't been public available and the council didn't adopt it in any formal sense, that it really is of limited relevance.
Yes, that remains my position. It hasn't been made available in any public forum. It's not available on any website, and it hasn't been opened for submissions in any way. So it really is a backroom document as such, used internally by council's planning team, but not taken any further.
Yes. Okay. The second and final question relates to the PDP, and I understand what you're saying in response to the chair's questions about the role of the fuzz. And really, I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that really it's a holding zone until such stage that the zone is, upzoned to a urban or residential type zone, and the aim is to prevent any development occurring that would preclude that upzoning in the future. Is that it in a nutshell?
That is it in a nutshell. That's it exactly.
Yes.
And I suspect, although I can't guarantee, having not written it, that is the basis behind the non-complying activity status for commercial activities, retirement villages, and healthcare. That if the purpose of the FUS is to provide additional residential land in the future when it is required, such activities may prevent maximum yield of residential occurring.
Yes. And so when that, I mean, I know we're talking about speculation because it's a draft plan, but in assessing a non-complying activity, decision makers and reporting officer would have regard to the objectives and policies, and you've appointed us to an avoidance policy at P3,
Yes.
which is to avoid development that would hinder or prevent urban development, albeit that the retirement village and the associated residential component is a form of urban development in its own right. So would you accept that there's a potential dissenting policy pathway there, even under a non-complying activity?
Yeah, potentially. Obviously, you'd have to pass the tests of Section 104D, objectives and policies and effects at the time of any such consent.
Or effects, because the limbs are separate.
Yes, and you know, a case could be made either way, especially noting the structures and buildings of a scale and form section. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, in terms of it being a holding pattern, it would very much depend on what the priority need was at the time that it stopped being a holding pattern and was ready for upzoning. Okay.
So what I'm taking from that is that the PDP has some relevance, but in applying its relevance, it needs to be nuanced in terms of what the draft provisions would enable or not enable. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all for me, Stephen.
Okay. To resume with the Section 42A addendum, I think that the discretionary activity rule 21(5)J has been well traversed in the legal opinions, so I won't dwell on that. In terms of the NPS HPL, I just want to...
Can I just ask a question of that?
Yes.
Your 4.4, Megan.
Yes.
You're suggesting that, you know, if we were minded to proceed with approving the plan change in some form,
Yes.
you're recommending that there be a additional new discretionary rule just to make that clear in this situation. Is that right?
Yes, and my understanding is that in the closing legal submissions for Welhom, they have also suggested a similar rule.
Okay, so is that in your appendix where you give us the, if we were minded, your recommendation on plan change wording, appendix 1?
Yes, it is. Just going through there, it should be at the very end. Yes, so amendment 7 at the very end, page 13 of appendix 1.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you very much, Megan. Just carry on.
Okay, so carrying on to talk about the NPS HPL. So I think in terms of this, the requirements of the NPS for HPL were well traversed during the substantive hearing. However, for clarity, I'd summarise that although the site is classed as land use capability 3, both Messrs Allen and Milner concluded, albeit for different reasons, that the soil within the site is subject to permanent limitations. These limitations are such that the site may meet the requirements of exemption clause 3.10 of the NPS HPL. However, I note a recent legal decision, an Environment Court case 59 of 2023, Judge Stephen said that the transitional position under the NPS HPL is clear by clause 4.1 until the NPS HPL has been given effect to in the relevant RPS. Each territorial authority and all consent authorities, including the court, must apply the NPS HPL to land within the scope of clause 3.57a, where it is not excluded by the exemptions in clause 3.57b. So I consider the assessment against the NPS HPL to be relevant and necessary. Welhom has demonstrated that in respect of the retirement village component of the plan change, the criteria of clause 3.64 can be met. In respect of the balanced residential component, the arguments for the requirements of clause 3.64 being met are less robust. Specifically, Mr. Heath's evidence in chief states that Property Economics has assessed Masterton and Carterton districts as having around 1,880 dwellings worth of vacant zoned residential greenfield capacity. Using the Sense Partners projections provided by Mr. Heath at a rate of 280 additional dwellings per year, this equates to sufficient supply for 6.7 years. On this basis, I do not consider the balanced residential component of the plan change meets the requirements of subclauses A and B of 3.64. In terms of clause 3.65 of the NPS HPL, it's my opinion that the minimum necessary spatial extent to provide required development capacity would be only that part of the site intended to be developed and used for a retirement village.
Megan, is that supplementary to your addendum, that statement? Sounds like it is.
Yeah, so that's clarifying the statement. All that stats are in there. The only new thing is the Environment Court reference, which came through this week.
Yes, I've seen that, and I did want to ask certainly the lawyers about the effect of that. To my mind, I'm not sure what I've always been concerned with the retrospectivity issue myself about plan processes that are already in train, and then the government coming along and saying, you know, the normal legal issues around not making those retrospective and the natural justice issues with those. I'm not sure how, and it's only about a paragraph in that Prue Stevens decision sort of thing talking about that. I'm not sure whether there's, you know, I do want to see further legal submissions on this, and we'll provide an opportunity to do that at the end of this adjourned hearing.
Yeah, I did read the same parts, and it was interesting in terms of the retrospectivity question that they concluded it wasn't being applied retrospectively, but from the date of becoming operative, and picked up anything in train that wasn't completed at that date. Yeah,
no, I understand that, but there's broader issues in that. Just as an example, in the New Plymouth District case, we had the same situation, and there were very detailed legal submissions either way on this issue of natural justice and retrospectivity. All I'm highlighting is that I'm not sure, because it was only dealt with so briefly, what information the judge might have had on those legal issues, and we certainly will need pretty fulsome legal submissions on those issues, certainly from the requester, and we'll provide that opportunity. And Daniel might already be ahead of us on this, so we'll see what he has to say. On another question, you're really saying that in your 5.6, or firstly, can you, I think to be fair, you need to provide your additional statement you just read out to the parties?
Sure, it's actually the same as in the evidence. I've just done the calculation from Mr. Heath's figures that are already in the above paragraphs.
But you've made some conclusions based
Yeah.
on the Judge Stevens.
Oh, yeah, I can absolutely, yeah, that's one additional paragraph that I'm happy to provide.
Okay, I'm wondering whether someone there might be able to just zoom that through
Yes.
to Daniel to have a look at before to use in his closing. He'll do his best to that, because I didn't actually write that all down.
Okay.
So I wonder whether someone can do that for us while we carry on.
Sure.
Okay. Look, I'm looking at your 5.6 in the addendum, and you do say that there is a strong case based on Mr. Heath's evidence for the retirement component.
Yes.
But you're less certain about the residential rezoning, suggesting that maybe if we do approve the retirement component, it's better on a Section 32 basis to leave out the residential component of the land. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an option. Obviously, as we've discussed, the NPS HPL and its application is fairly untraversed. And there, in terms of the permanent limitations of the soil, there could be an argument at detailed mapping stage from the regional council why this land shouldn't be included as highly productive land, but that hasn't happened yet. And based on Mr. Heath's evidence about the remaining zoned vacant greenfield residential available, there isn't the same pressing need for balanced residential as there is for retirement village. And they made a really strong case through Mr. Heath about the availability of other land that met the criteria for a retirement village.
Yes. Megan, just on the expert assessment of that land that Greater Wellington Regional Council might do, we already have very detailed and highly qualified expert evidence in front of us that the land does have permanent limitations and is not suitable for high productive uses. So on an evidential basis, would you agree that we do have that evidence in front of us, and it would be unlikely? I'll stop there.
Yeah, I do agree that you have that in front of you. I note that the exemption clause in 3.10 of the NPS HPL says may rather than must. So it is a choice. And yes. That is open, yeah.
Okay. So look, just moving on to the Section 32 sort of approach to leaving that residential area out of any approved plan change. Do you think that would be efficient and effective on a 32 basis, given the evidence we've got in front of us about the quality of the land?
No, so not necessarily. I think you've got two competing viewpoints there. You've got the efficient and effective use of the land versus the direction to use the minimal spatial extent. So it's a weighing process. And if it wasn't rezoned now, there is the draft district plan provisions for future urban, which identifies a larger contiguous area. So it's potentially a holding pattern. Both the NPS HPL dictates a holding pattern, and the future urban zone dictates a holding pattern.
Okay, so I was really thinking about not the efficient and effective use of the land. I was more thinking about an efficient and effective planning process.
Right. Yeah. In that it is currently in singular ownership, it may be efficient and effective to treat it as a whole now. Yeah.
Okay, David's got a question there too, I see, so I'll let him come in.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. Megan, I've been following that argument with interest. Like the chair, I was struggling to note down the changes, so having that material emailed through will be useful, particularly that assessment against the criteria in the HPL. I wondered whether, whilst this is an HPL issue, whether there needs to be some consideration given also to the MPSUD in terms of, I know that Huston's not a Tier 1 authority, it's Tier 3, but it's still bound by the MPSUD, and the aim of providing, sufficient capacity in the planning period is one of the key sort of limbs of the MPSUD. And I just wondered what role, when we've got two MPSs potentially at loggerheads here. We're still waiting for resolution of these high level directions at the national level, and there'll be much focus on the national planning framework to achieve that. But in lieu of that being in front of us, how does the MPSUD intersect with the HPL in this sense, in terms of providing sufficient capacity? Or it's not a minimum requirement; it's at least sufficient. And particularly in relation to your 3.6 about perhaps not rezoning the balance of the land for purposes other than the retirement village.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that is the two pieces of national direction have potential conflict areas where land that would be ideal for future urban growth is also falls within the definition of highly productive land. As yet, there is no direction or guidance from the Ministry for the Environment's National Direction Team about how conflicts are resolved. Like yourself, I understand that is coming through the National Planning Framework. And in the absence of it, my opinion is that it remains a waiting, balancing exercise. And so it's trying to satisfy the direction of both pieces of national direction to the best of your ability, being mindful of the objectives and principles of both. So in terms of the requirements of this, of the MPS HPL, you've got that minimum spatial extent requirement balanced with the MPSUD and what is required for sufficient growth capacity. I know that the Wellington Regional Council are in the process of doing a future development strategy for the region, which will give more clarity to the territorial authorities about what is sufficient development capacity.
Yes, but you'd accept that it's not, that the MPSUD is not about providing an absolute minimum capacity, it's about providing sufficient capacity during the planning period.
Yes.
Thanks for that clarification.
There has been a bit of discussion about that outline development plan versus a structure plan. And I'd just like to clarify that my suggestion was not that a structure plan be required through a restricted discretionary rule, but that the ODP be replaced with a structure plan should the plan change be approved, and that structure plan goes ahead and the restricted discretionary activity rule refers to the structure plan rather than the ODP. I think that it would be helpful in terms of implementation and interpretation to have a more detailed structure plan rather than just the outline development plan as proposed.
I've got some questions on that, Stephen. Is that the appropriate time?
So do I, but David, you lead off. Yeah.
Okay. And this relates to the material I read on the joint witness statements by Catherine, Mitch and Megan. So thank you all for attending to that, and the outputs are voluminous and well color coded. Thank you. I guess the key question that I've got is what is the role of the structure plan? And I think all three planners are suggesting that it acts as some form of assessment, either in the case of Mr. Lewandowski as a controlled activity, but in the case of Megan and Catherine, as a matter of discretion to be considered as an RDA in their view. So I didn't see any positions being advanced by you, Megan, that the structure plan would be a precondition, that compliance with the structure plan would be a precondition to being a restricted discretionary activity. Rather, what I was seeing is that it would be a matter of discretion that the development will be assessed against as part of an RDA. Can you just confirm that to be your position?
Yes, and yeah.
Okay, that's very useful, and that saves a lot of further questions from me in terms of that. I do have some questions about the content of the structure plan, and that we can probably, I don't know if we deal with them now, Stephen, or not, but that related to the appendix at the very end of the joint witness statement. And my only observation there is that the content or the suggested content wasn't that clear to me as to what it would contain, how it would be shown on the structure plan. It was obviously a working example of what a structure plan might contain, but for me, in terms of having a rule that's certain, and the plan is a rule, I don't think it satisfied those sort of criteria. Stephen, did you want to delve into that?
Look, while we're on this topic, we should just carry on, I think, because it is important. The sort of the menu of what might be on a structure plan over and above what's on the existing ODP. I would like some clear advice on that.
And the starting
so you
point,
carry on.
Yeah, well, the starting point is I'm comparing your 510, Megan, on page 9, which is the information that you asked for on a more comprehensive outline development plan, and particularly those 5 bullets relating to, layout, transport routes, transport corridors, green and open spaces, buffer zones. They all seem to be highly relevant to a ODP/structure plan. And then I look at the elements on Appendix 2 to the joint witness statement. It's the one-pager. And it outlines what the elements are, but there's no details on the specifics of like timing, gap site selection, local roads, footpaths and cycle lanes, that sort of thing. And I just wondered what the expectation from you, Megan, was as to how those structure plan elements would be advanced as part of this process.
Yeah, I think that comes back to my overall conclusion that at this point, I don't feel like the provisions proposed set up an appropriate and adequate framework for mitigating adverse effects of development that would be enabled by the plan change, which is why overall it remains my position it should be declined. Trying to adapt the provisions proposed to something that would work is really difficult in terms of the infrastructure improvements, because there's such a degree of disagreement between parties about what would be effective mitigation measures traffic-wise.
Okay. On that basis, and noting your overall recommendation, hypothetically, can I put it to you that the need for the structure plan might be negated if the assessment criteria and matters of discretion are robust enough to allow an assessment of all matters, including the key transportation matter. The other way of putting that is, unless we can have specific metrics and details on the structure plan elements that are listed in Appendix 2, would it be better not to have a structure plan and maybe defer to a more broad outline development plan and allow the matters of discretion to do all the heavy lifting in terms of the assessment, because we don't know what some of these thresholds on a traffic sense are. Why try and second guess them? Why not allow the process to undertake that work, so long as the matters of discretion and the assessment criteria are robust enough to allow that, noting that the restricted discretionary activity would still allow the council to decline the application and certainly bring in third parties such as Waka Kotahi.
Yes, I would agree with that statement on the basis of it being a restricted discretionary activity with robust matters of discretion and the ability for council to notify Waka Kotahi.
Okay, yes. And so just for the record then, would you be accepting of an outline development plan that was more in line with what your paragraph 5.10 anticipated when the further information request was given?
Yes, I would. I would prefer a more detailed outline development plan as per 5.10.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. Thank you for that. Stephen, did you want to carry on that one?
No, you've covered it very well, thanks.
Okay, just moving ahead with the section 42A, the 14-metre maximum height area and the definition with wording of building versus buildings has been covered in closing legal submissions for Welhom, so I don't intend to dwell on that. Yeah, and I believe equally the Rangiora Somerset example has been well discussed in the reasons why it is not a comparable example. So moving on to the connectivity issue, I have highlighted the areas where I don't believe the plan change is a good strategic fit. There's a broader discussion of strategic fit against multiple documents in my section 42A report itself. This is simply a reference to specific policies and objective of the RPS that I don't feel the plan change is achieving compliance with. Just quickly on buffer planting, I agree with Ms MacArthur's assessment and support her position that the buffer planting be extended around the eastern and southern boundaries of the site, and that it would provide a transition, softening of any landscape and visual effects, noting the change in density and built form between the site and Cashmere Oaks and the adjoining rural residential land.
Just on that, before you leave there, obviously we heard a different view. I think it was from Mr. Bentley. Yes, who was happy with buffer planting on one boundary, but thought that wasn't supportive of buffer planting on the northern boundary, I believe. How have you resolved those competing positions from a planning point of view? What's assisted you in favouring the evidence of your witness, or the witness for the council over Mr. Bentley's position?
So Mr. Bentley raised crime prevention through environmental design as a concern with buffer planting. However, I note that in my experience, retirement villages usually have boundary fencing, which would present no less or no more of a crime prevention through environment design risk than trees would. And in this case, we have a residential neighbourhood of Cashmere Oaks where there are a range of covenants limiting built form to single storey on quite large sections. There's going to be a marked difference in built form. So I think in this instance, landscaping would be a useful mitigation measure to provide that softening of the landscape and visual effects.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I think Mr. Bentley was particularly worried about the impact that buffer planting would have on the connectivity between the existing development to the south of the retirement village and the retirement village itself. And from a connectivity urban form perspective, I think that's why he was opposed to that. What's your thoughts on that?
So connectivity wise, there will remain the entrance, and in terms of visual connectivity, there is going to be a marked difference. It's not going to blend, irrespective of whether there are trees and planted buffers. It will very clearly be a retirement village, which usually, as I said, has perimeter fences. And I think it's appropriate that there be that demarcation and transition between areas. Okay.
Have you given any consideration to perhaps not making it this a standard at this point, and perhaps extending it to a matter of discretion to be considered if the RDA status prevailed?
Yeah, it could work as a matter of discretion.
Thank you. Sorry, you were going to move on to water risk supply, I think, before I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. It just quickly on that issue, I note that despite the joint witness statement of Mr. Brents and Mr. Rose, it remains Mr. Rhodes's position that this issue in terms of the private booster pump should be a precondition, if not included as part of the structure plan. And the reasoning for this is that this is required to facilitate development of the subject site, and it is solely of benefit to the requester. Ergo, it should be fully funded and provided by the requester rather than a financial contribution taken towards it at the time of resource consent.
You've added a rule in there somewhere in your appendix 1, haven't you, Megan, to cover that?
I think so.
Policy?
Yes, a new standard.
A new standard.
Which one is that?
That is on page 9 of Appendix 1, new standard 5.52p.
Right. Okay, so this is what happens if that's, well, how would that standard be administered?
So
just take us to how the standard fits in. So what's
sure.
5.5 dealing with?
So I think that is.
Are they permitted standards or?
Yes, permitted activity standards.
So, okay. So if you don't comply with that standard, and I guess it's about the intention to install the booster pump, because you couldn't wait until it actually being installed to see whether you complied or not.
Mm.
But if there was a clear message in the application that the applicant wasn't going to provide the booster pump, what would be the default activity status?
I'd have to look into that. Apologies.
Yeah. I guess the reason I'm asking that, Megan, is I wonder whether these matters need to be covered in rules, or whether they're something that's a live consideration for the engineering design process with any subdivision and land use.
Sure. I think for me, this is something that needs to be addressed prior to any, or to facilitate any residential development of the site. And it's important to address it as part of the plan change, because the evidence is that without this, there would be a dramatic effect on water pressure for the existing Lansdowne suburb, particularly Cashmere Oaks. And the difficulty I have with leaving it to the engineering design is that should the plan change go ahead and residential zoning be applied to the site, council would then have obligations to provide services under the Local Government Act to a residential standard, and should this booster pump not be provided by the requester to facilitate the development and fully funded, it would become unplanned, unfunded work that falls on council.
Okay. Well, I think I'll leave that for the applicant to respond
yeah.
to. But
I've got a question on that, David.
Yeah.
What would stop the council on a RDA decision imposing a condition requiring that?
Nothing.
Okay, so that's a potentially a conditioning matter, but yeah, certainly it would be as a precondition of an RDA. I find that unusual, but I think you confirm what you're saying. It's a permitted activity standard, but really we'll get on to your appendix 2 a bit later, but just something to think about, Megan.
Okay, moving on to traffic and transport, and I don't propose to go over this in detail again. Council's position on traffic and transportation effects hasn't changed and is well covered in the substantive 42 report, as well as during the hearing and the evidence of multiple parties. Ms. Fraser will have further evidence about her position, which I support.
Okay, and I think you've outlined why you support that, but it is. I do have one question, Megan.
Yeah.
With the statement of transportation, what do we call that? Statement of facts or something? I was really thankful of the way Harriet sort of commented on her findings against both of the positions from Waka Kotahi and the applicant's experts, because we've got very experienced experts. So what I took from that, and I'll ask Harriet some questions about this, but it seems to be reasonably finely balanced. Like there's clearly evidence from very experienced experts. Not saying sort of dodging around on a pinhead, but they seem to be largely in agreement on most matters in terms of effects. The outcome of whether a roundabout's needed or not could again be imposed by condition on an RDA application consent. Is that
No.
It couldn't be.
No, I don't think that the council would have a basis for imposing a condition requiring works on a state highway.
I've seen that many times.
Yeah.
You'd have to convince me otherwise, because a decision maker has the ability to make conditions, and it might even be on a detailed assessment provided for as a volunteered condition in an application. So I'm certainly very well versed in those sort of conditions being provided either by the support of an applicant or not. Can you just give me the legal position why a condition like that would be ultra vires?
So I can't give you a legal position, I'm not a lawyer, but what I would say is that it would certainly be open to challenge, because any such condition could be blocked by Waka Kotahi if they didn't grant a corridor access request to do the works.
But on what basis might a public authority block a mitigation measure that a condition required and an outcome that they supported? I just don't get it.
Well, I can't speak for Waka Kotahi, but in the instance that they didn't support the particular mitigation measure, it's ultimately at their discretion whether they grant a corridor access request and permission to undertake works within a state highway.
Okay. Well, look, I'll invite Daniel to give us some legal thoughts on that, and maybe Rachel as well. But yes, well, we've got your opinion that a condition cannot be imposed. That goes to a legal matter, which we'll follow through on.
Can I just add to that, Stephen? Because I think I share your thoughts on this, Stephen. I've certainly seen such conditions imposed before, and Commissioner Dace and I are very familiar with the development in New Plymouth, known as the Blue Haven development, where works on the state highway, substantial works, were a condition of a consent, certainly a condition precedent, because they involved third-party approvals. But those conditions were accepted by the applicant, in fact, volunteered by the applicant. And everyone knew that there would be an approval process over and above the resource consent. So there certainly is a precedent for that happening. I just would invite you, Megan, to perhaps consider whether it's more a question of whether not whether you can't pose such a condition, but how effective or what the implications of that condition might be.
I think that is where I'm coming from, that in terms of the effectiveness of the condition and that it requires the third-party approval, it could be challenged.
Yes,
So
so that's a risk. That's
yeah,
a risk
that's
to
a risk.
to the applicant, though, isn't it? That they may or may not be prepared to accept.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's useful clarification. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So just on the traffic issue, I am not a traffic engineer, but I do support Ms. Fraser's position and evidence. My understanding as a planner is that while there's disagreement about the exact numbers, it's acknowledged that development of the plan change site as proposed would have an impact on the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive and State Highway 2. Waka Kotahi has proposed one method of mitigating that effect back to the current baseline, a roundabout, which, as has been discussed, would mitigate further than the baseline, but it is a method that would get back to the baseline at least. Ms. Nielsen has proposed mitigation methods that would not go back to the current baseline, and Ms. Fraser is of the opinion that there might be a range of intermediate interventions that would work effectively in mitigating back to the baseline.
Megan, I think you just got to be a bit careful how you've couched that. You're not a traffic engineer,
No.
And you've said that, in your opinion as a planner, the suggestions from Ms. Nielsen would not mitigate the baseline. So you're relying on.
Sorry, in that
I've heard, I think.
But also the evidence traversed at the hearing and Ms. Nielsen's evidence about the statistical reduction that would result from those improvements, and that it wouldn't go as far as the current baseline. So I am relying on the expert evidence of multiple traffic engineers there. Moving on to the appropriate activity status for the retirement village. Again, I feel this is really well traversed in the joint statement from the planners. And the reasons why I believe that the restricted discretionary activity status is the best and most appropriate activity status is that it includes the ability for council to notify and decline the consent, should that be their opinion at the time of an application, but also that it signals the seriousness of the traffic issues. Controlled activities are generally used where there is not just well-known and understood effects, but relatively minor effects that everybody is confident can be controlled with conditions of consent. In this case, I think there's a degree of uncertainty around the scale and nature of the eventual development, given that there's no maximum limit on the number of retirement units.
Thank you. Anything else you want to elaborate on, Megan?
No, I don't think so. I'm happy to take any questions.
I've certainly asked my questions throughout, but David, you may have some other questions.
Not really. I think we'd sort of questioned you on the appropriate activity status earlier in the session, Megan, and I've just noted that there are two options. One is a structure plan, and the other is a modified outline development plan, and you'd acknowledge they were both live options.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, who do you, should we hear from Harriet now? Is that the best next order?
If that's okay with Harriet, I think that would be sensible.
Welcome, Harriet.
Good
I know
morning.
you put together that that statement for us under a lot of work competition, so really thank you for doing that in terms of you being busy. So it has been helpful, as I said, particularly your observations beside each matter were really good. So you just want to take us through your highlight of your summary statement, which I think you prepared after the joint witness process.
Yes, and it's attached to Megan's document as well.
Yes, I've got that. We've read through that, so it's really
And I'm wondering whether I might actually, because I've written some notes as the morning's progressed, and I'm actually wondering whether I might cut to the chase
yes,
if I could.
yes.
Which so yeah, I think you've commented on the statement of facts, and there is, there's a fair amount of agreement, and then there's some differences in opinion that come out of that. And with regard to the SIDRA assessment, which is the intersection modelling, which is that's modelling the performance of the intersection in terms of delays and queuing. I have included a comment there. It can have an impact. Obviously, delays and queues can have an impact on safety, but it's primarily a tool for looking at the efficiency of an intersection. And the modelling shows that it would continue to perform satisfactorily in terms of efficiency. I have got some concerns about it being on the optimistic side in terms of its performance for a number of reasons, which I've set out in my statement. From the safety side of things,
Just on the performance, Harriet, could I just ask a question about that on the way through? I'm looking at item 17 of the statement of facts, Transportation and Road Safety Experts document, which has that level of service graph in there.
Yes, I've got it.
Yes. So I think what I've taken from your comments, that you do agree with the level of service band that Mark's provided, and just looking at the scenarios on the right, they're all in the scenarios are A and B, and then just slipping into C a little bit. So that's,
Yes.
That's overall, that's a pretty reasonable performance under all of the scenarios.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Yes.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I've written good beside my.
Yes.
So good level of service under the scenario. So when would in your experience, a road controlling authority start being concerned and start looking for intervention and intersection upgrades? At what level of service would they start looking at those sorts of actions?
Well, at a level of service of D, things are beginning to creak, and then you're wanting to avoid E's and F's. And that would be I would be looking at in this case, it's going to show up particularly on the Cashmere Oaks Drive, and I would be concerned with the right turn getting to an E, or a D or an E, because you can look at it on you can either look at it on a turn basis or an approach basis, or as the overall intersection. So you could still have the overall intersection performing well, but within it a component that was really struggling.
My read of this is that Mark has looked at all the scenarios, and we're nowhere near D,
it can escalate quite quickly when you've got a number of factors. So that the gap selection affects it. Obviously, the traffic volumes affect it, and it can and there's also the historic traffic growth factor. So we've got a 2% per annum traffic growth assumption. We've got a gap acceptance that may not be at the more conservative end, which I think might be reasonable with the older drivers. And I guess those are the two main components that could change it. And so you could see it change to, it's not unthinkable for it to get up towards a D for the right turnout with some of these changes, but it hasn't been tested.
But I suppose is it fair that if you added 10% or 20% onto those input assumptions, it would take quite a bit on my understanding of this level of service methodology to get up into D.
It will take a bit of extra traffic, and it's not it's the performance of the intersection in terms of efficiency isn't my key concern. It's the safety
issue.
So this
okay.
And of course, if you put in a roundabout, you get delays for everybody then. So if you were talking purely on efficiency, then a roundabout would not be considered efficient at all.
No, I understand that. Okay, thanks for that. I'll let you carry on with the safety issue.
So then with the safety assessment, I've sort of set out my views on the factors involved with that, and that I'm not an expert in the DSI prediction methodology, but that I understand that there's a number of areas. It's I think the word blunt tools being, but what it does show is that there would be an increase in death and serious injuries, albeit that's quite a small increase from that assessment. I more particularly have concerns about the right turnout and the side impact crashes, which I think Glenn Connolly explored more, where we know that in higher than 50 km/h environments where there are side impact crashes, which is the kind of crash that results from a right turnout, that the risk of death and serious injury is fairly high. And so the safe system approach is to minimize the risk of that by having speeds of closer to the 50 km/h speed. So that's my primary concern around safety, is people turning right out into a 100 km/h environment. That with the retirement village, there are both retirement residents, and we've heard, I think it was of an average entry age of 82 or something like that, and so they will of course have some visitors who are similarly elderly, and that with the elderly they are they have a more cautious approach to decision making about making turns, and in the event that they are involved in a crash, that their bodies are more frail and vulnerable to injury. So what a healthy younger person might have as a minor injury can be a serious injury in an older person. So and yeah, so that's
Harriet, you said that we're in a 100k environment. That's not the evidence, is it? There's a 100k speed limit, but
okay,
it's
so
not a
the
100k environment.
We're in a 100 km/h speed limit. We're in a closer to an 80 km/h operating speed. We are at the other situation that we're in is where we've got people accelerating and decelerating because we're close to a speed limit change, which that's what that can affect how you're selecting gaps in the traffic. And we heard the two, or at least one of the submitters who's a resident talking about using sort of physical markers to you know, when a car passes a certain place, that they're using that to work out whether what the gap's like. But it is more challenging, you know, in a steady vehicle speed operating environment. You can make all those judgments and be more certain that the gap really is however many seconds that you are comfortable with.
Okay, thanks.
And so yeah, my view is that there is a an increased risk of death and serious injury, that we're not absolutely sure the scale of that because of the blunt nature of the assessment tool, but because we're introducing more right turns. It's in a location where that right turn out is the dominant term. We've got 80 to 90% of vehicles making that right turn out. So we're introducing a risk there, and in my view, the way of mitigating that is of the intersection operating at a slower speed. Now that can be through a number of interventions, and I don't believe that a roundabout is the only way that can be achieved. But the key matter is that the vehicles are turning within a speed environment that is around 50 km/h. That could be, it may be that in the interim between the plan change and a resource consent that the speed limit is dropped, although that looks unlikely at the moment. It could be that it is through a roundabout, or there might be options with putting a T intersection onto platforms so that it's got raised treatments. And then in turn, we've heard from Waka Kotahi, if the speed can be brought down to closer to 50, then they can then look at bringing the speed limit further out. So it doesn't necessarily, then we're back into the chicken and egg discussion that we had through the hearing. But the key matter for me is the 50 km/h operating speed in terms of making a significant impact on reducing the risk of death and serious injury from side impact collisions from a right turn out. The other matter for me then is the safe crossing for pedestrians and cyclists of State Highway 2. So if there's a slower speed operating speed as a result of an intersection infrastructure intervention, then it makes it feasible to add in a pedestrian and cycle crossing point somewhere between Opaki Meadows and 4th Street. It just, and again, that treatment could be, it could either be a crossing, a sort of a flush crossing, or it could be a raised threshold crossing, which again brings the speed down as vehicles are crossing. But the key matter for me is that it will, by having a slow operating environment, it introduces the possibility of being able to add that crossing point. And in particular then with the cyclists, it would be in my mind the need to then widen the existing footpath to a shared path width along the Cashmere Oaks frontage, so that cyclists can truly use that with pedestrians to then get to wherever the point is, which has been facilitated by the change in operating environment.
You've currently assessed that at 1.4 metres, the current footpath.
Yeah, I've measured it, yes.
It would need to be
Two and a half, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the one that's just been constructed, you know, the one through to, oh God, I've forgotten the name of the street at the back, but the one that there's one from Cashmere Oaks.
Yes.
Through
yes.
Miro, is it? Yeah. I think.
Yeah. Yes.
That looks like it's 2.5. So that's 2.5 is generally considered satisfactory for a low usage, you know, lowish usage shared path. So
and there's room to do that.
I expect so. I'd expect so. And also if there's potentially changes, again, during the hearing, Waka Kotahi spoke about if the operating speed is brought down, then the speed limit can be brought down, and then they would look to make changes with the road edge to support that more urban environment, which could well be, you know, if you've got a lower speed, you can bring the shared path to the edge of the road. Even at the moment, it's sort of separated from the road, albeit it need to be on a different level, but you know, on a curb. So then I think that from my perspective, and as you've sort of discussed this morning, it's then how those matters might be brought through into matters for, I think use the words, you know, robust matters of discretion, how those are then captured, being they're quite prescriptive, and yeah, especially the speed one. I'm not sure how that's worded to capture what would be my intention of it being quite specifically down to that sort of 50 km/h speed.
Okay. Anything else to add before we go to questions?
Those are my notes.
Yeah, Harriet, I'd like to take you to item 19 in the statement of facts. This is around the cost estimates of a roundabout solution. Like, I think we heard from Glenn in the hearing that it was, you know, in the order of 1.5 to 2.5 million for a roundabout solution in that type of environment. And you see, and he does, but then he has that number, but then he has an initial concept of design, has an indicative cost of 3 to 4 million. So I'm just not sure whether that was the Wilton's design or the Ngāmutawa design over the page, but both of those were more 2 to 3 range. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I think from my perspective, I think the Ngāmutawa intersection, because I'm quite familiar with that location as well, which helps. But you know, that's going to be a larger roundabout than what would be being looked at. It's a very significant roundabout. So we've got the State Highway 2 carrying straight through there, and we've got the heavy truck bypass going off to one side. So I think, you know, that would be a very much an upper estimate. I would imagine that that we're looking at, you know, considerably less than that. And this is also is a current, you know, it's not yet, they haven't yet started building it. Well, they've got some, you know, there's some stuff out there, but it's happening now.
And that's got 4 legs, isn't it? Where this one would have 3.
Yeah, I suspect one of these legs is probably more of a access to businesses opposite. But yes, we would only have 3 legs because it would be, the purpose would be of bringing the vehicle speeds down. It can be tighter, and because it's not we're not accommodating sort of semi-trailers and B trains doing right turns, then again it can be more compact.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, David, did you have any other questions for Harriet?
Just one, Stephen. Harriet, just on the last matter that you were talking about how do we capture all these matters and the matters of discretion, and you ended up by saying, well, it might need to be quite prescriptive. I want to put to you that maybe the solution is not to be prescriptive and let the process work it out based on having the ability to consider all relevant matters in the round, and with the ability to either add conditions or decline consent based on the evidence that's presented. So are you open to that sort of concept also?
Yes, I mean, I think if obviously safety will be there as a key matter of discretion, and connect that the matter of pedestrian and cyclist connectivity and access, and also, yeah, if Waka Kotahi are included in a notification process, then that it keeps all the matters covered.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Stephen, I understand why I asked that question, because there might be some directions coming forth as to how we get to those sort of matters of discretion in a more inclusive manner. So I'll leave it at that in the meantime.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Harriet, I have one more question, and it was about the statistics applied. I think Liam gave us some stats about the increase in sort of the safety risk of in his legal submissions, and he was applying a statistical method of starting at a very small base in terms of the safety risk, and then saying, well, if it goes up a little bit, that's got, I can't remember the numbers, but a very high 200-300% increase. So just from a technical perspective, applying a statistical increase like that to give us guidance that this issue of safety was, I won't say extreme, but very high. Do you have any comments on that, using statistics off a very low base?
Yeah, I have to say that I mean, my starting point is more that I have a gut feel about the safety implications of that right turnout by into that speed environment. The statistics, that I don't think, I wouldn't give much, you can have a big significant increase of a small change, and we're not looking at a huge increase in risk of death and serious injury, albeit that calculation is being made in a very approximate way. My preference is the safe system analysis assessment way, which looks at that there is the risk of these. You look at the particular crash types, and the risk of a side impact crash resulting in serious and fatal injury in this location is likely. If there is a side impact crash in that location with a right turnout in that speed, then there is a good likelihood of a serious or fatal injury.
Thanks for that clarification. Thank you very much for your assistance, Harriet. It's much appreciated.
You're on mute, Stephen.
Sorry, I think we're moving to Angela now, just to round out the sort of the witness part of the council's reply. Is that right? Hello there, Angela. Yes,
Hi.
you've given us a statement that we've read. So maybe just give us a couple of minutes of your highlights of where you're at.
I know there's been discussion about the activity status, and there's one thing that I would say, that there's with the outline development plan. Sorry, there's still, with just the northern boundary shown as to be planted, there's still very little detail about how that's going to be maintained or protected, and my preference would be to plant the eastern and southern boundary as well. I mean, it could be made a condition, and I see that in the amended amendments and Megan's addendum. I can't find it now. Oh, here we go. Condition F refers to 1.5 to 2 metre wide planted buffer zone around the northern, eastern and southern external boundaries, which, as I said in my right of reply, that it's really to actually help the kind of change in character, and it's more to take into consideration the existing environment that's there, rather than to maintain rural character, as such, as I had said in my original evidence. But I mean, these sort of boundary treatments could be considered as a condition of consent. And I sort of envisaged that area, there'd be like a landscaped strip that could be fenced off from the rest of the development areas, in particular in the residential zone, so that it would need to be protected by a consent notice or something like that on the future lots, as the northern boundary would have to be anyway, as the applicant agrees that they're prepared to plant the northern boundary. I'm not sure how they envisage that will be protected in the long term.
You could have conditions of consent associated around a detailed landscape plan that was presented in a resource consent application.
Yeah,
Angela, couldn't you?
yes, you could. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I was just reflecting on David's question about the connectivity issues. Is your experience that retirement villages in urban settings are normally sort of hidden away as a buffered, fenced, closed community, or are they more usually, and I'm thinking about an urban design outcome, more sort of connected into or integrated with the rest of the community? Do you have any experience with other retirement villages that have taken this approach of buffering them away in a visual sense from the rest of the community they are in?
Well, I mean, the retirement village will have roads going through it, and there'll be an entrance road, and generally
That's not my question, sorry,
yeah.
Angela.
Well, normally there is buffer planting. The fencing, I don't know, fencing is going to be solid fencing on the boundary bordering the existing residential area. I would expect
that's not my question. My question was, can you give us any examples of where this type of buffering on retirement villages to essentially buffer them and close them off from the rest of the community has occurred.
I'm familiar with a couple of local ones. There's the Ryman's village in Waikanae, which definitely has buffer planting around the edges and between the streets and the local streets and the units that border onto so that they're quite private.
Yes.
The vegetation includes specimen trees and shrubs. Also, another one is Parkwood Village in Waikanae, which has got a lot of planting associated with the village, and it's quite private. I mean, it's quite a large area. Would be a similar sort of scale over 2 or 3 hectares of land.
Yes. Are you envisaging?
I would agree that a lot of villages do have buffer planting around the edges.
Are you envisaging like a solid wall of planting as a shield, or trees and low shrubs?
Well, I was sort of imagining, a few taller trees and then low shrubs in between. So it's not like a solid,
Okay. Yeah.
It's only going to be up to 2 meters wide. It's not, going to be a whole landscaped area of planting.
Okay.
It's not very wide.
Yeah, I'm in Waikanae this afternoon, so I'll have a look at those 2 examples you've given me. Okay, so David, do you have any other questions?
Yes, just one. I guess, Angela, the 3 options that I've listed down here for dealing with this, based on what you've said, either a standard in the plan, like 1.5 metres buffer zone with the boundaries nominated. Second one is not to have a standard, but to have that shown on an outline development plan in some graphic way. And the third one is not to have either a standard or anything on the outline development plan, but rather to have it as a matter of discretion to be assessed on its merits as part of the resource consent. In terms of flexibility, I guess the first one provides very little flexibility and the last one provides fuller flexibility. Do you have any comments on what you think might be the most appropriate one to achieve the outcome that you're suggesting?
I would prefer probably the last one because it's got more flexibility and discretion. And I mean, it should be something, worded like boundary treatments to provide for privacy and integration and take into consideration privacy effects for the cashmere oaks and the rural residential area.
Okay. You might want to just reflect on that because we might want to ask you to have some input into the wording of that.
Okay. Yeah.
But that was all from me, Stephen.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Angela, for your assistance. And I think we're now at the legal submissions that Rachel's provided us. So can we go to that now? Rachel, are you there in the room with the?
Yes, I am. Yes.
The team.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Okay. I don't expect to spend too much time here. I don't see the legal issues as being particularly controversial. So I will skip through, hit the high points, and any questions, feel free to interrupt me. If I start with the discussion on section 74.2, which is around the relevance or otherwise of documents, I think generally parties are on the same or a similar page, except in relation to the MUGS document. And you'll see from my discussion and the submission that I have a slightly different view to Megan. in that I think that strictly speaking, MUGS does fit within the 74.2 category of documents that are relevant, but the limitations of the document itself are such that it should have little or no weight in terms of the panel's considerations. And certainly I say there in paragraph 21 that the reliance being placed on the MUGS report by the applicant is unwarranted. Just to contrast that against the documents that were discussed in the case law that we were referred to, the Land Co decision and Kiwi Property Holdings, the documents there were clearly strategic documents that were front and centre for the councils involved. They were used, they were publicly available, they've been through that process, and MUGS is entirely different in that sense. It's untested, undeveloped, and has now, we've heard, been earmarked to be reviewed and updated anyway. I think matters have clearly moved on. The reference before was that it's a backroom document, seems to have sat on a shelf somewhere and not really been looked at by anyone. So it's a very limited practical use. The next point I did want to discuss was the activity status, and Commissioner McMahon took us to that passage, paragraph 59 of the Forest and Bird and Whakatane decision. The evidence we've heard from Ms. Barr and echoed by the other witnesses is that the other witnesses for Waka Kotahi and Council is that the controlled activity status doesn't fit the bill in terms of that section 32 analysis. Mr. Liam Bowen, in his legal submission, had said that there's no hook to ensure notification of Waka Kotahi in a controlled activity consent. And I mean, the real concern, I think, is that there needs to be some ability to decline consent entirely if it's appropriate to do so. That's probably about all I need to say on that point. The rest is largely evidential. If I move now to my paragraph 43, which is the discussion around Rule 21.5J, just briefly touch on that. You'll recall there was an issue with the interpretation of the word, effectively the word access, with Waka Kotahi submitting that it meant direct access, and Ms. Barr forming a different view. My discussion there is really that I disagree with Waka Kotahi that the plain meaning of the word access is limited to direct access. I agree that the rule itself is unclear, and the case law direction is that a purposive approach to interpretation is to be taken. But where I get to essentially is the same point, which is that in context, that rule, in my view, is clearly intended to refer to direct access, and it has been applied by the council so far to that end. In terms of its applicability in this situation, I think we're well placed to be saying that Rule 21.5 does not apply to this proposal or any subdivision. I do note that Megan has closed that loop with an amendment to the rules, or to a new rule L, and I would say that addresses that issue and provides the clarity that's now required. The final point here, I don't know that I need to discuss that, is around the financial contributions section. it does take a bit of stepping through, but in my view, the opposite situation, it's not an unclear set of provisions. It just takes some working through to reach a position where you form a view in terms of the contributions that can be required. And para 70 there, I'd conclude by saying that it's ultimately a matter of discretion for the council as to how funding is spent when it comes to issues of roading. And as you imagine, that's a great big area with a whole lot of different tendrils, so needs careful consideration. So that's me in terms of my submissions. If you've got any questions.
I only have one question from me, Rachel. It's about your paragraph 70. Is your view that there's no legal or administrative barrier from a council applying financial contributions funding to dealing with immediate roading issues around a proposal, even though it might be on a state highway?
No legal barrier. I think in this context, it does just need to be recognised that this is a general financial contribution. So, you know, there are a whole range of considerations, but certainly no legal impediment to doing so.
Or administrative? There's nothing.
No. I mean, they'll have their own, you know, policies and background documents in terms of planning, long-term plans and stuff like that, annual plans, but none at a higher level that I'm aware of.
It would normally a council, or is there any obligation on a council to apply financial contribution to sort of deal with or to improve the environment around a proposal in terms of council functions? We had the classic example that the financial contributions from the Stratford Power Station were used to build the new Stratford Clock Tower example. Sort of no relationship so whatsoever to the issues and effects around what the financial contribution was paid for. Can you give us any help with that?
Not from a legal perspective. I mean, that sort of direction comes in the rules and the provisions of the plan and the surrounding policy documents. So, you know, councils are free to set those parameters themselves. And certainly my reading as a lawyer, I'm not a planner, my reading of these provisions is that they have been set up intentionally so that some of the financial contributions are specific to the proposal, or at least specific to the effect at issue, and some are general, which in the case of the roading and access one is where it sits. It goes into the pool of money and is where it is, yeah.
Yes. Okay, no, that's certainly helpful. David, do you have any other questions for Rachel?
Yes, I have one question for Rachel and one arising for Megan, and it all relates to paragraph 57. So this is the solution, Rachel, that Ms. Barr's referred to in dealing with this direct access issue. The question to you is, I guess it's twofold. Firstly, do we have scope to make that alteration? And secondly, it would only be ring fenced to Appendix 16, I imagine, and any fix for the application of the wider rule would be the prerogative of the future district plan review. But on the first issue, do we have scope to make that change?
Yes, I did consider that at the time. I think as long as it is specific to Appendix 16 and the specifics of this proposal, then it comes under that consequential amendment. Okay, the reference is missing in my head at the moment, but the scope is, the change would be within scope, but anything broader than that, we would be outside of scope.
Sure. And I think Mr. Mahinick will comment on that later. Second question is from Megan, and sorry, I should have asked this earlier, Megan. On your page 13 of the appendix, that's amendment 7. Is this the provision that's being referred to? The new L?
Oh. Yes, I would say that's, yeah.
Yep, that's fine. I think Rachel, you'd referred to it as J. I just wanted to make sure that I was
yes,
actually
sorry.
eyeballing the right provision.
Yes, I've probably written that paragraph before the numbering was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Understood. The more substantive question to you, Megan, from me is, and it might be a simple answer to this, is why is it cast as a fully discretionary activity as opposed to, say, a restricted discretionary? Has that got something to do with the architecture of the plan at the moment, dealing with subdivision, or is it something that you've recommended?
So it does relate to the architecture of the plan at present, and the discussion about the rule that we determined through debate and legal opinions did not apply to the site, in that was a full discretionary activity rule, and the policies around the policies supporting that rule relate to effects on the state highway. And I think given the one access point relying on a T intersection with the state highway, it's appropriate that those policies apply in this case. Okay, so am I hearing that the language has changed to deal with the direct access issue, but the activity status is not unchanged? It always was a discretionary activity, depending on your interpretation of the direct access component. That's right. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Does having different activity status for subdivision and potentially land use create any planning issues that you can foresee?
No, I don't think so. I think that's fairly common in district plans around the country. You'll quite often find situations, for example, where people could build a second dwelling on a site as a permitted activity, but a subdivision of that same site for 2 sections would be at least a controlled activity.
Right. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, council team. That's the end of our questioning on your right of reply. Could I suggest, since we've been all going since 8, we take a 10-minute comfort stop, and we'll reconvene at 10 o'clock. So I suggest you all stay online, maybe turn your buttons off, and we'll come back at 10.